So good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Tabbins. I'm the MPP for Toronto-Danforth. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We're going to be spending about an hour on this whole issue, Bill 5, its impact on First Nations communities and the North generally. We'll be allowing people to pose questions, make comments through the Q&A function. And as your questions and comments come in, my hope is to be able to put them to the panelists when they've spoken. And just a note that at the bottom of your screen, under the thing or the button says more, you hit those three dots, you'll see closed captioning, so you can actually have a readout as we go along. I'm going to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land that we're hosted on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. So we have a very simple agenda this evening. I'm going to talk about the purpose of the meeting. We're going to have updates from our two panelists. We'll have your questions and commentary. As we get questions, we'll put them to panelists. We'll also read out some comments. And then in the last 10 minutes or so, we'll have a closing comments and information. So purpose of the meeting, pretty straightforward, to fill people in on the latest Bill 5 developments, to hear from our panelists about how this bill will impact First Nations communities and Northern communities generally, to hear from you, what your questions are, what your comments are, what your concerns are, and discuss how people are mobilizing to defend themselves against Ford's autocratic rule and how you can join them. Now, I'm guessing that if you're here this evening, you already are aware of Bill 5. But just as a very quick refresher, Bill 5 was passed by the Ford government last month, and it allows the government to set up special economic zones where provincial laws can be suspended, as well as local municipal bylaws. So any provincial law, child labor laws generally, environmental protection laws, zoning regulations, health and safety regulations, water protection regulations, all can be set aside to allow a project that the government has approved to plow ahead. That's not all, but it is the heart of it. People are very angry about this Trump-style legislation. That's not surprising. 3 weeks ago, we did a webinar diving into it in some detail, and we'll give you that link when we send out an email at the end of this webinar. If you want to pose questions, as I said earlier, please use the Q&A function. We won't be using the raise hand feature or the chat. So any questions, please type it into the Q&A. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible. However, our expectation from previous webinars is that the volume will be greater than we can handle. We'll do the best we can. Before we go to the panelists, they have an awful lot of ground to cover, and I will be warning them as they get close to the end of the 7 minutes that's been allocated that they're running out of time. And it's unfortunate, but there's so much to go through. We are going to have that limit. Now, our first panelist is Athena Bidasige Pheasant. She's Anishinaabe from the Whitefish River First Nation on Manitoulin Island in Robinson, Huron Treaty Territory. She's the executive assistant to Saul Mamakwa, MPP for Quetanong, and has worked in Saul's office for 6.5 years. Their most recent work was on the response to Bill 5. And I will just say, fabulous response, great leadership, very tough stuff to deal with. With that, Athena, the floor is yours.
First, I'm going to unmute myself, and then I'm going to do my best with the time I have here. So I'm not going to delve too much into the bill because I feel like a lot of the people in the room, again, like Peter said, are going to be somewhat familiar. So yeah, my name is Athena Bidasige Pheasant. I'm from Whitefish River First Nation, and I'm very happy to be here today. I want to thank Peter and Brennan for being here, and also to Peter's team for hosting this. I know that a lot of work goes into these events. Yeah, so I've worked in MPP Mamoka's office for um, quite a while now. When you say 6.5 years, it's a bit, you're like, okay, that is quite a while that I've been here and I've seen a lot of things. But one of my jobs in the office is to help prepare our office's response to legislation that impacts our constituents, which are largely First Nations people, but also all First Nations in Ontario. Due to Saul's critic position, which is the critic for Indigenous and treaty relations, as well as Northern economic development and growth. So we've always had like a lot of work in front of us. Um, and so April does feel like a very long time ago, but that was when this bill was introduced. And I remember going into the legislative session, hearing that there was going to be a bill relating to the Ring of Fire and major projects. And I definitely had some anxiety over what that would entail or what would be in it. But you can't know until something is right in front of you. Um, so I have like two lenses when I look at policy. So one is, sort of the objective way that I was taught in university. So, what does this help? And then what policy issue does this solve? But when I actually read Bill 5, I knew that we were in for like a very huge challenge because the challenge in front of us was how do we protect the North? How do we protect the breathing lands, the water, and the ways of life of all the people who live on the land? And so, how do we maintain that integrity of the ways of life of the people of Kiiwetinoong, of the North, like anyone who these projects impact, in the face of legislation from a government that doesn't really respect or fully understand who we are as people? So I'm not saying it's impossible to do development in a way that respects the environment, but those, in my personal experience, those message methods are always slower than the speed of business, and they cost a lot more money. So it's not ideal for an industry that's looking to, particularly when you're thinking of something like mining, where they're always looking to make a lot of money for their shareholders because there's always a lot of investors. So it's not ideal, right, to run business slowly, to do consultations slowly and things like that. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, I'm an Anishinaabe person. I'm always like any decisions I make or the work I do. Um, I'm accountable and like whatever I do generally in life, I'm accountable to my community. And so that's the lens I use in my work. So that's the best and truest lens that I have to examine legislation and policies that come across my desk in the office where I work. So I have to ask myself, what do these policies mean for First Nations people and people in the North? So at the end of the day, we were left with a bill. So Bill 5, and this is just the very high level points that we were left with a bill that strips away environmental protection for endangered species. It removes archaeological assessment and consultation on projects that might impact Indigenous heritage sites, which includes burial sites and former residential school sites. Um, it the government did not consult with any First Nations rights holders during the drafting process, and overall is a huge violation of our existing treaty rights. Creates special economic zones in, any kind of industry, not just like resource development, where protections are in place for a reason and those don't apply anymore. Strips away environmental reviews, grants lawsuit immunity to developers and officials, and lets cabinet overrule existing provincial and municipal laws. So those are all, a laundry list of very grim facts about this bill. But it took a lot, and so because the bill was like big and very dense too, it took a lot of time for our office to sort of relay that information out. But once it was out, um, it was um, yeah, once it was out, like the ball got rolling. Like people really started to pay attention to how serious this was, and more people than I ever expected were really paying close attention to what was happening with this bill and the process. Um, And knowing like how long the legislative session was, it was really like a short, condensed session, like 7 weeks. The process was going to be, extremely fast. And so when you're in opposition, you don't get told like when the bill is going to come up or when committee will happen until like you get the same notice as everybody else in the public does. So once it started happening, it was just really fast. And the committee process was again like one of the ones where it was just like very unprecedented what I saw. We had an unprecedented number of First Nations applicants to apply to appear before committee, and there was only 2 days of public hearings, which really limited people's ability to be heard. There were hundreds and hundreds of written submissions that were put in on this bill from people, which really spoke to the desire of people to be heard on this bill. So not just First Nations people, like I'm talking everybody in Ontario was really motivated to be heard on this bill. Um, and what we heard in the limited public hearings that we had and what I saw in the written submissions, um, was that the bill itself and the lack of consultation related to it, was, very disrespectful. People did not feel heard. We heard from First Nations communities, and other people, like just like regular presenters, that people have an obligation to protect the environment and the earth, for like not only all of us who are living now, but people who are living in the future, and that Bill 5 is a threat to that responsibility. And that the last minute response from the government was inadequate to address the levels of concern that were put forward by all the people who spoke out on it. And it was a very unanimous response from First Nations across Ontario. Like First Nations in Ontario were very united in how they felt they were being treated with the introduction to the bill, and then the lack of the lack of feedback that was taken on the bill as well.
Athena, I hate to say this, but you just about hit 7 minutes. If you could, you've got a lot, I'm sorry, but if you can wrap up, we'll go to Brene.
I'm gonna wrap up. I'm gonna wrap up.
Okay.
So yeah, we've seen it, but so, having said that, we know that the bill is passed. There's a couple of different things that have happened recently, and I will also pass this information on, so that people can like click the links of the Facebook groups that I'm going to mention here. But the Mushkegowuk Chief Council of Chiefs, whose territory the Ring of Fire sits on right now, they have a resolution designating that area as a protected homeland. So I can pass that on for people's readings. There was a lawsuit introduced 2 days ago in the Ontario Superior Court by 9 First Nations to have Bill 5 and C5, the federal bill, declared unconstitutional. Um, and so I can pass on an article about that if people are interested. And then there's a number of youth movements um, that are happening. So, and I will pass on the information so people can just go to the Facebook pages. But there's a number of young people from the North who are starting some very significant movements to protect the land, and they're doing days of action and movements, and sharing a lot of really great information. So that's really great energy to see. So I'm really appreciative of all the work that they're doing, but I will definitely pass this on to be shared with all the participants after. So that's it for me now.
Okay. Thank you, Athena.
You will.
Um, Our next speaker is Brene Lloyd. Brene is a project coordinator with Northwatch, which is a regional coalition in northeastern Ontario that advocates for environmental protection and supports public participation in decision-making relating to mining, forestry, energy, waste, and nuclear issues in northeastern Ontario. Brene is an active volunteer and organizer with We, the Nuclear Free North, a Northern Ontario-wide alliance of Indigenous and non-Indigenous residents and organizations opposed to the transportation, processing, burial, and abandonment of nuclear waste in Northern Ontario. Brene, take it away. It looks like you've got your screen already set up.
Great. Thank you, Peter, very much. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you all. My name is Brene Lloyd, and I'm joining from Nipissing Territory in Robinson Huron Treaty area. and I'm going to speak in 7 minutes or less, I hope, about Bill 5, Northern Ontario, and nuclear waste. And there is a connection. So Bill 5, this was our sort of our masthead during the Bill 5 campaign. We're in now a period of real deregulation, and we've been in it for a while. I think we've been in it for longer even than the current Ford government. I guess provincially it's happening with Bill 5 most recently, federally with Bill C5. I think the gift of Bill 5, if you can call it that, is that it draws our attention back to this. It's been ongoing, the deregulation, particularly environmental deregulation, and Bill 5 has drawn attention back to that. The curse of it is that it is going to amplify and accelerate. It is amplifying and accelerating that deregulation. And there's a fit between Bill 5 in Ontario and Bill C5 federally in that they are both stripping away environmental rights and the social rights to participate in environmental decision making. And some of the same projects or the same communities or the same territories could be subject to the worst of both Bill 5 and Bill C5. So Bill 5, it deregulates. So Athena's mentioned, I think, the special economic zones where all rules are off. But under mining projects, the minister can simply exempt mines or proponents from following the rules. And Bill C5 nationally can declare a project's in the national interest. And same thing, the rules are off. Environmental protection is gone, but also our right to participate in environmental decision making. So just as context for, I want to talk a couple of minutes about nuclear waste in Northern Ontario, but the context for that is all of the other activities happening in the region. And I'm going to speak specifically about the mining projects, which we are, that is a primary concern we have with Bill 5. So the map, it's hard to read. There are small dots in many places, and those are mining projects. There are 5 operating gold mines and 6 operating nickel, copper, cobalt mines, but there are 32 mine projects, and you can see it. That's from 2025. This is from 2022. So there are more in 2025 than were in 2022. But this is just the map of critical minerals projects in Northern Ontario that are under development now. And so couple the impacts of Bill 5, the threat of Bill C5, and both the provincial and federal governments' preoccupation with speeding the way, paving the way for critical mineral projects and the greenwashing of that projects, you can see that we have an incredibly challenging time ahead in Northern Ontario with these projects being pursued and promoted. So that sets the context for the nuclear waste burial project that the nuclear industry is promoting with the support of both the provincial and the federal government. So flip back and forth between these maps. The mining is in the north. The impacts from the mining are in the north. You look at the nuclear map and the large icons in the south, those are the nuclear generating stations where the waste has been generated and is currently situated. And the large bullseye in the north, that's the Revel site. That's where the nuclear waste, the industry intends to place it. So I think those mining projects are context for the nuclear waste management organization's project or proposal, and that is a proposal to bury all of Canada's high-level nuclear waste in a single location. They've been working away at this for decades. In November, they announced the selection of the Revel site in the heart of Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario. It's between Ignis and Dryden, or from further away between Thunder Bay and Winnipeg. And the NWMO has been pursuing this for decades, and through all those years of pursuit, said they would only proceed with an informed and willing host, and they have neither. They have a guise for the township of Ignace, and the township council has signed a willing host agreement. NWMO has declared Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation to be the other willing host community. Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation in November had a vote, and their community agreed that the NWMO could move to the next step of site selection or site characterization. And they did not agree to be a willing host. The NWMO project will have 4 major stages after the siting process. The first is extraction, something the reactor community should be concerned and interested in asking questions about. Transportation, which will affect, hundreds of communities en route. Processing, which will happen at the site. And then emplacement, the burial, also happening at the site. And transportation goes through hundreds of communities, follows the coast of either Lake Huron or takes the northern route through the James Bay lowland, cross, and those 2 routes join up at Nipigon. So there's threats to both Lake Huron and Lake Superior through that route. And the end point is Ignace, is the Revel site between Ignace. So when that site if that site were to be developed, the impacts will be in the watersheds of that region and the airsheds of that region. Lots of risk along the transportation route. When those wastes, if they were to arrive at the Revel site, they'll be processed, they'll be unpacked in what they call a used fuel packaging plant, releases from air, releases to air, releases to water, contaminated water pumped up from the underground and the deep geological repository, and many releases from the processing facility. And that's where Bill 5 comes back in, because under Bill 5, this area could be declared a special economic zone, and all rules would be off for those very contaminated substances being released into the airshed and into the watershed, into the headwaters of both the Wabigoon River system and the Turtle River system. And those both the Turtle River goes into Lake of the Woods. They both meet up and go into the Winnipeg and then ultimately to the Nelson. So lots of impacts there. And again, back to the Bill 5 connections and the connections between Bill 5 impacts and this project. Provincial permitting could be suspended for this project through Bill 5. It could also be federal permitting could be suspended through Bill C5. But it's the same watersheds are being impacted by those mining projects that we looked at. It's the same airsheds being impacted by those same mining projects. And it's
Renee, I'm sorry, you are running out of time as well. I need you to wrap up.
I'm going to go 1 more minute. It's the same
Okay.
communities, First Nation and Indigenous. It's the same water, same lands, same bodies of the people, the children, and the grandchildren. And I'll leave it at that. There is a process still to come, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. And thank you for your time.
Okay. Panelists, thank you both. And there are quite a few questions here. I'm going to start with the questions about Bill C5. Comment here was that the federal government's Bill C5 does the same things as Bill 5, allowing Carney Liberals to act unilaterally. I assume you want to comment on that because I think there have been a lot of people talking about that similarity. But also, does the similar federal bill make things even harder to fight? Athena, do you want to start off on that?
Yeah, I think it right now, and I'm seeing it play out right now. Like if anyone has seen the news today, First Nations leaders from across Ontario had a meeting with the Prime Minister on C5, and it was the same type of concerns that we heard about Bill 5 as well, about, not being at the table, being involved in the drafting of the bill. And I think it has also like really drawn out a lot of the resources of First Nations to have to deal with like both of these things, there was an overlap. Like I remember when we were, in the sort of the last week of the debate on Bill 5, we heard about the introduction of C5, and it was like, okay, here we go again with, having to, press the government only on the federal level in the same way about about these very similar bills. Now, the scope of the bills is a little bit differently. I've read a couple of different legal reviews, and actually, the scope of the Ontario bill is wider than the federal bill. So, worse in that, if you want to think of it in that way. But they're both equally not good. So that's it for now.
Before I go to Bernane, just a note that Bernane's slides will be made available and we'll send them out with our package. Bernane, you're nodding. Excellent. Okay. Bernane, would you like to comment on this as well?
Sure. I think it does make the fight harder because there's more of the fight. And I think something that is similar between both Bill 5 and Bill C5 is we don't know how they're going to play out. So we don't know if a project is going to be declared in the national interest and so exempt. We don't know if a project is going, if an area is going to be declared a special economic zone. So I think that has a little bit of maybe a chill effect. I think the other thing that makes it difficult is that it makes it clear we don't have any friends. You would hope that if the provincial government was engaged in rampant deregulation, you could look to the federal government for some good governance, or vice versa. And what it's, and what these two bills coming out at the same time and are responding to them both at the same time makes it clear is that they're both about deregulation. They're both about taking away the public and Indigenous peoples' ability to affect outcomes in their communities and their territories.
Okay. Bernane, thank you very much for that. There's a question from Penny. Could the speakers comment on the feasibility of planning a day of action or protest for all people in this province? I think that many people would take time off work to join a province-wide demonstration against this unconscionable bill. Athena, do you want to go first on that? Because we've already had some demonstrations at Queen's Park from First Nations communities. Athena?
Yeah, so we had one big one. And then I definitely, I wish there would be. And I think part of the issue we have right now is that the legislature has risen for the summer and for a very long time. We're not scheduled to go back until October 20th. So if I was a planning and organizing person, I would want to make sure that I would do something very loud on that first day that we go back. Um, and hopefully that will happen. I know there's a lot of people talking about it, and but we're also trying to do other things through the summer just to make sure that we keep our attention on this and that let the government know that it hasn't been forgotten about.
Okay, thank you. Bernane, did you want to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, I think it would be a very welcome initiative, and I like the idea of October 20th, Athena. Nipissing First Nation organized a rally coincident with the one in Queen's Park, and there was a great turnout on very short notice. I think there's an appetite for it. I think there's an appetite for taking action. I think that people don't want to be silent. They don't want to be silent. So I look forward to the news.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say to everyone, I usually refer to July as the graveyard of meetings, and we have over 120 people on this webinar this evening, so I find that extraordinary myself. I have a question from Anne. Bill 5 has no mandatory review process or public disclosure. How is that possible within our Constitution? And I will leave it to which other one of the two of you want to speak to that.
I mean, full disclosure, I used to work for the provincial government on the other side. I was a bureaucrat, I want to say a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And, you know, when you introduce a regulation or a bill, there's a lot of legal hoops that they have to go through to get a bill, and there's a lot of like risk assessments that are done on a bill, and I think sometimes it's like you roll the dice and see what the appetite is there publicly, right? Like, will they know that there will be pushback on they knew that there was going to be pushbacks. Like, I haven't seen any documents to that effect, but you know, this is the kind of bill that there would be pushback on it. So, you know, I think the government's like, well, we are a majority government. We have a lot of influence right now. And so they're going to um, push their agenda really hard while they still have a mandate to do so from the public and while they have the majority in the legislature. So that's just how I view it.
Okay. And did you want to speak to that as well, Renee?
Yeah, just briefly, I don't know how either Bill 5 or Bill C5 are constitutional. I don't know how they what kind of an assessment was done. I know federally, usually, typically, there's a regulatory impact assessment statement prepared. I'd like to read that for both these bills. And certainly there hasn't been a kind of a long-term analysis done. When you think back, in 1990, when the Mining Act was modernized after a century of not being modernized, we had 6,000 abandoned and orphaned mines in the province of Ontario. Decades later, we're still cleaning up abandoned mines, and Bill 5 is a recipe for more abandoned mines. So, constitutional, legal, I don't know. Practical, rational, it certainly Bill 5 is certainly not.
Okay. I have a question from Benjamin. Is there any sense that UNDRIP can be used to push back against these initiatives? And Athena, I'm going to ask you first.
So there is a there's a federal law, so it's like people refer to it as UNDRIPA. So it's the UNDRIP Act. So it doesn't, but the whole UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which is what UNDRIP is not enshrined in Canadian law. So it's more of a principle than an actual regulation that has to be honored. Um, so, you know, like what the idea, the principle that we talk about of like say free, prior, and informed consent, it existed prior to you know, the writing of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, like that idea. But it was placed into that, and it was something that, you know, is used more now by First Nations leaders when they talk about projects and development that happens within our territories. Unfortunately, uh, the federal UNDRIPA Act is pretty watered down um, from what the actual United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People is. So it doesn't have a lot of like say teeth as far as like making change as far as law goes right now. It's something that is still in an ongoing process. So you know, it's something that can be referred to as a standard, but you know, is not something that we can like change the law with right now.
Okay. Renee, did you want to comment as well?
Yeah, I'll just say I'm really looking forward to. I've heard only brief news coverage of the legal case brought by 9 First Nations yesterday. So I think that is going to be that's where we'll look for our analysis and also see what the outcomes are of the meeting of the Indigenous nations and Prime Minister Carney today. So there's more to learn.
Okay. Thank you. The comment here from Pernita. Canadians get all indignant, elbows up about the arrogance and impunity of the US incursions in our home. But the Hudson's Bay Company and the French Imperialist Alliance never asked once for permission from the people who God put upon this abundant land for permission, even once. not a question, just a comment. And also see comment from Michael from Toronto-Danforth. Conservatives are in the business of exploiting Indigenous treaty lands. So there's a fair amount of, of commentary to that effect. From Frederica, what about judicial review of both acts as a way of responding, as a way of pushing back? Do either of you want to address that?
I mean, I think that is what we're seeing right now, with this legal action, with this injunction that has been put before the courts, in Ontario. So it's actually, they're asking for, um, it's the injunction relates to both C5 and Bill 5, but they're asking for an injunction to prohibit the federal government from naming national interest projects and also to prohibit Ontario from implementing special action, special economic zones, as all these action words relating to these bills. But this is going to take like anything, especially something this complex, it's going to take a while to work its way through the courts. So they say they probably won't get an answer on that for about a year.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, Brene, did you want to comment on that as well?
What Athena said.
I think that's a wise choice on your part. Um, I have a comment here from Drew. I'm out of work, so I can't donate. What other ways can I support? And I think a lot of people who are on the call tonight are asking that question as well. Uh, Brene, do you want to speak to that first?
Well, I think that I think there are First Nations actions that are taking place. Athena's mentioned some of that. I think that there's the effort around Dresden and which was a victim of Bill 5 and around nuclear waste. I might show a couple more slides at the end, but you can there's a lot of work to be done, very pressing work to be done in the next few months. So you can certainly join in those efforts. I think that people need to keep talking about it. They need to keep calling their MPs, their MPPs for the respective bills, and just don't stay silent.
Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the easiest things you can do is, if you have, friends or family who, care about the same things you do, to talk to them about it, because not everybody, I mean, if say you're on Peter's mailing list, you're pretty dialed into like environmental issues, and maybe not everybody is as aware or dialed into like what's happening on the ground at any given time. So sometimes it's just like reminding people about what's going on and saying, hey, this thing is happening and it's pretty serious. And having those conversations with people in your life that might, that are open to hearing about, what's happening, and what we can do to support people who are speaking up about it.
Okay. Thank you both. From Sandy, is there any chance the UN could or would put pressure on both levels of Canadian government on the environmental issues involved?
Um, so I think that there's a particular way that the UN goes about their work, and it's not necessarily in in sort of like the like they're not going to issue a press release and say, Canada and Ontario is really bad. But if you look into like a lot of the work that some of their special rapporteurs do, so like if you look into the work of the special rapporteur on Affairs. I just messed up their title. But they do a lot of like right now they're actually doing a ton of work on critical minerals and the relationship of Indigenous peoples with the extraction of critical minerals. So there's a lot of really interesting, informative, well-researched work that is being done by the UN, but people sort of have to go and search it out themselves as to like the information, but it's kind of all there. And I think that's sort of like more like how the UN gets things done. But I think like that special rapporteur will eventually, when they always put out a report after say like a year's worth of work. But I think the critical minerals work is still ongoing. And so they'll eventually put out a report. So when they do put out those reports, they're usually like pretty well publicized, but you can always go into their website and like find the interim reports that they're working on. And that's something that I use a lot for my own research at work. But yeah, it's not necessarily like a, finger wagging type of thing where they call out Canada. And, unfortunately, that's just really not in my observation, not how they do their work.
Okay. I've got a question, comment from Sri. It's hard not to see the wave of anti-protest bylaws sweeping across the province and the proposed federal version as connected to the same logic behind Ontario's Bill 5 and the federal Bill C5. They seem to reflect a broader trend of consolidating control and limiting public dissent. Can we name and articulate that connection more clearly? Do either of you want to address that?
I haven't thought on this deeply, but from the top, I would say the connection is to the lack of public voice in environmental decision making and social decision making that we see embodied in both Bill 5 and Bill C5. I think that's a clear connection. And I think that um, shutting down of public voice, Indigenous voice, the next step then is to, if we don't have a place in the actual decision making, then the next place is for us to go to the streets. And so the next response is to try to shut down that. I think that just means that we have to be better organizers and more strategic in how we carry out any actions that we're called to. And we've seen this before. I mean, this happened when the Mike Harris government came in as well. We saw the same thing happen before. There was a clampdown, and as organizers, we had to rethink some of the ways that we organized, events and actions. And so we're seeing it again.
Okay. Um, we're starting to run down towards our end here. So there are two questions at least I want to get in. One from Jeff. Will the waste nuclear fuel be only from Ontario nuclear plants or from Quebec and New Brunswick? I assume the latter waste, though smaller, also requires treatment and disposal. And I'll just add that uh, the proposed nuclear power plant in Alberta is suggesting that their waste will simply be taken to Ontario. Uh, Renee, do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, I think you just did, Peter, and I think that it is for NWMO's proposed deep geological repository for the Revel site. It's all of the high-level nuclear fuel waste created to date, which is all of the CANDU waste at the three stations in Ontario, plus a smaller volume in storage at Chalk River, at Gentil in Quebec, and Lapro in New Brunswick. They have, unfortunately, a second deep geological repository, which they have announced they will also be pursuing, and that is for intermediate level waste. But they have also said that they could place in that deep geological repository, which they haven't even begun the siting process for, and they have certainly haven't even begun the design work. They are intending to place in that repository the intermediate level waste, but also they have said they can take the waste from small modular reactors, including the 4 boiling water reactors now being moved towards construction at Darlington. And the NWMO wrote a letter to Bruce Power saying they could take the waste from the not yet chosen, not selected design for the 4 reactors, 4,800 megawatts, increasing output at the Bruce station by 70%, already the largest nuclear generating station in the world. NWMO quite extraordinarily wrote a letter and said they could take it the site they're pursuing at Revel, but they could also perhaps take it to this other geological repository. And then there's the 4 reactors, large reactors now being proposed or pursued in Alberta, potentially a CANDU design, a revised CANDU design. And they have said that they'll be sending it to the Revel site in Treaty 3 territory in Northern Ontario. It's really a shells game. shell game. NWMO has been switching stories about where the small modular reactor waste will go over the last 8 years. And the shell game has just gotten, busier now that they've announced this second repository for intermediate and whatever other waste they might place in it. So that's going to be another siting process, and which many communities could be subject to and divided by.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of questions. I have a comment from Bud Wildman, who is
Ah,
familiar with these issues. These
yes.
two bills are likely to hasten the degradation of the environment and hasten the extinction of endangered species and the rights of Indigenous peoples and non-Indigenous citizens throughout Ontario and Canada. Thank you, Bud. And I'm going to go to this question from Lola, and I think this is the last we can squeeze in. This is generally seen as a northern problem, so getting people motivated is hard. The overriding of legislation can occur anywhere. Do the unions understand that their rights will be removed? Do southern residents realize the environmental rights removal impacts? How do we get this more broadly viewed and give support to the Indigenous groups who are fighting these bills? Uh, Before I turn it over, I'll just say, Lola, unions have actually been well aware of potential impact on their rights and have been building a coalition with First Nations people. But Athena, I think you can speak to this more broadly than I can.
Yeah, I mean to add on to that, I think initially, um, when Bill 5 when we were like talking about how to address Bill 5, I think initially it was painted in the media as like solely an Indigenous issue. But what we learned, what my experience was that it did go like far broader than that. And then we did have lots of allies in the labor movement, and they are still, working alongside us and helping to keep this momentum moving forward because, we do know that there are potential significant labor issues embedded in these laws. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would, keep an eye out. They are, I know personally that people who work in unions who are doing a lot of really good work relating to that. Um, yeah, so I hope that, people have the ability to, just keep paying attention to what's going on as we keep moving forward with this, because it's not a done deal by any means.
Okay. Brene, I'm going to ask you to comment as well, and then um, we're we're going to need wrap-up comments from both of you. Brene, um, how do you see this in terms of getting that consciousness out there?
Well, I think it is. I think certainly the North will be impacted by these projects, but it's not just a Northern problem. I think that the rollback of environmental rules can happen anywhere and everywhere. So I think that it's everybody's problem. It's everybody, So I don't think the South should sit this one out. Um, and and again, I'll say that this is moving on a continuum. So we're seeing environmental deregulation. We had in North Bay last year, 2 years ago, a plastics plant announced that we were told would have require a certificate of approval for discharge to air. Makes sense. And instead they were given an easer where you just register. And this is something that we saw in Bill 5, the ability to register projects rather than assess them. And so I think it's coming soon to a factory near you.
Fair enough. Thank you. So I would like it, I would like to have both of you give 3 or 4 minutes, if you can, sort of summarizing um, what you've observed. And I know you had a lot more you wanted to say than we could fit in earlier. And if you could comment as well on Doug Ford's talking about building oil pipelines through the north with Danielle Smith from Alberta, and is talking about putting a deep water port in James Bay. Both of those projects are seen as candidates for Bill 5 special economic zone status. I think that could be useful. Athena, do you want to start off with your closing remarks?
Sure. I mean, I can speak a little bit more specifically to the deep water port, the deep sea port. This is it, just sort of popped into my. I heard it in a press conference, and I was like, "Where is this? Where is this?" And actually, I remember it did. There was one mention of it in the budget that came out, and I was like, okay, that's odd. Knowing, the geography I do of the North and how much would go into um, making a deep seaport feasible um, in the far north here in Ontario. Um, so there's no details. Like for me, like it is an idea. There's no details in the budget, and so far there are no details being mentioned in the press when the premier gets asked about it, and he has been asked about it multiple times. I think they drop it. It's like they're breadcrumbing us, right? They drop it into press releases and things like that to get people excited about these big major projects. And it keeps, it's something that the media picks up on too, and they sort of keep the ball rolling as well. And, when you talk to the people who actually live and are leaders in that area, that was a surprise to them too, right? Like the government went to Timmins and held a round table where apparently they did discuss this deep seaport with Minister George Peary, but there was not any First Nations leadership in that roundtable. So that tells me everything I need to know about the feasibility of that idea.
Athena, thank you.
Are we concluding as well?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I'm just going to say really quickly that when these bills like Bill C5 and Bill 5 get pitched to First Nations, it's always under the idea of like giving us wealth and prosperity. But to me, as a First Nations person, as an Anishinaabe person, wealth and prosperity is living on the land. It is speaking our language. It is schools in every First Nation. It is high schools in every First Nation. It is safe, clean drinking water. It is proper housing and infrastructure. And, us having the self-determination to live like our absolute best lives. So, I don't, I personally don't see major projects as being like the solution, but it could be part of a suite of solutions. But I think that it's just, it can't be the only solution. And right now, that is what I see both the federal and the provincial level presenting these bills at. And that's not, for me, that is not what wealth and prosperity is. And I think a lot of my people feel the same way as well. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Athena. Renee, if we could have some wrap-up comments from you.
Sure. Thanks, Peter. I'm not a big fan of the free market system, free enterprise, the market-driven economy, but I think it's absolutely missing from a lot of the government speak that we're hearing about these projects. Who is going to pay for the Ring of Fire development? Who is going to pay for a pipeline east to west to east? Who is going to pay for a deep water port? We've been hearing about the Ring of Fire for, I think, a couple of decades now, more than one anyway. And we hear lots of announcements of federal funds going in, provincial funds going in. The proponents come and go. The smelter siting processes come and go. The mine, proposals come and go. And there's no development. And that's because they're not economically viable projects unless the taxpayer foots the bill. And that's the same with the pipeline. I think that there should be some kind of an economic test. And if these projects only go forward because the taxpayer pays for them, then they shouldn't go forward. I mean, there are other reasons they shouldn't go forward. I think Energy East, which was the project to pipe bitumen through a natural gas, a line that had been built for natural gas, went through Northern Ontario, and it was fiercely opposed throughout the North. And then TransCanada dropped it, and they dropped it because there wasn't a market case to be made for it. And I think that the same questions need to be asked and then answered for many of these national interest projects or national infrastructure projects. So in the meantime, I think we've got a lot of work. We've certainly got a lot of work on the nuclear waste file. On the nuclear file, we're in a period of incredible nuclear expansionism with new projects being promoted and pushed. Ontario Power Generation is a utility out of control, spending ratepayers' money with abandon. They put 93% of the NWMO's bill. They put money into small modular reactors that are then, put back on the shelf. So we've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of work to do in demanding accountability and really knowing these projects, speaking to these projects, speaking to our friends and neighbors, and um, uh, stopping them.
That's pretty straightforward.
I think so.
Uh, Brene, Athena, thank you for taking the time this evening. Your contributions were invaluable. I think all of us who were here this evening learned a lot. I want to thank my staff, Rob, Jasmine, Avreet, for doing all the work organizing tonight and making things flow smoothly. Very much appreciated. And to all of you who joined this evening, well over 120 people, thanks for your questions. Thanks for your attention. As everyone knows, this is an opening period. What we are expecting at some point is announcement of special economic zones or projects. And I think at that point, that's when it becomes very real and when people are going to have to mobilize politically to actually protect our rights and protect the rights of First Nations and communities in the North. And as Lola had said, it's not just the North, it's going to be all over Ontario. Get ready, more to come. Have a good evening, everyone. Again, thanks for joining us.
Thanks all.
Talk to you
Thank
later in
you,
the
Peter.
summer. Bye for now, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks
everybody.
to everyone. Bye.